Hey, just want to say before the episode starts, this is your official spoiler warning because the movie that I'm about to talk about, I'm going to tell you pretty much everything that happens as I remember it, as coherent as I can, um, from beginning to end. So, yeah, if you haven't watched it yet, the movie is available actually on YouTube, one of the only places you can watch it. So go there, check it out first if you don't want it spoiled.
We belong to a mutual admiration society. My baby and me. We belong to a mutual admiration society.
We're back like we never left. Welcome to the second episode of Mutual Aberration Society. I'm Ryan. Off top, if you haven't noticed, there should be an improvement in the sound quality. That is because after listening to the first episode and not being terribly happy with how it sounded, I went ahead and got a new mic and did a few other things. So, moving forward, the quality should be a lot better than that first episode on Hunting Ground. That said, the second episode, I'll be talking about the 1969 film Too Young to Die by Kiyoshi Nishimura. IMDb doesn't actually have a synopsis listed when you look the film up on the site, so I'm just going to paraphrase the rough synopsis on Letterboxd. And it goes like this. A couple comprised of a cheating wife and a retired car racer arrive at a roadside diner. Shortly after, a man with a gun arrives and begins to take hostages. Chaos inevitably ensues in director Kiyoshi Nishimura's debut film, almost entirely filmed in a single location. Okay, it's a pretty accurate description of what the movie's about. A few things though. I was unfamiliar with Nishimura before watching this movie. As I was looking into this director, I came across some things, and I haven't really been able to find much to really that really delves into this at any length. But apparently, Nishimura was arrested in 1987 for, and get this, secretly using a video camera in a public bathhouse for women. Yeah. So yeah, Nishimura was on some Chuck Berry shit. And apparently, after being caught, few companies would hire, Nishimura, obviously, and simply for the fact that like this was a big scandal, like just got heavy news coverage in Japan in the 80s. So I guess once that happened, he directed television shows under a pseudonym. The pseudonym was Yusai Ito, and that's a pretty fucked up thing to do to do in general, but that's also a pretty it's a pretty bad way to end your career. But it doesn't end there. So shortly thereafter, because he got caught in '87 for filming women in bathhouses. But on November 17th, which is my daughter's birthday, weirdly enough, November 17th, 1993, Nishimura was found drowned on the Hayama coast. He was 61 years old, and the police investigation concluded that it was a suicide. Yeah, so that just gives you sort of a rough idea of the filmmaker. Now, when it comes to Too Young to Die, I'll have to say this. Outside of like Nishimura as a person and as a man, Based on this film, I will say this: this is one hell of a good debut film. Um, and honestly, while I was watching it, it had me like it had me really like I was locked in. Like if a film can hold me in that way, then it automatically elevates that film for me, just on a personal level. Now beyond that, it's just a quality film. It's a very quality film. Now, I don't know if people are familiar with the Hateful Eight. I think it was Tarantino's last film before it was the film before his last film, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Right. Well, if you know that film, I bring that up because Hateful Eight has Too Young to Die energy. That's the best way I can put it. Right. They're very similar in the way that you have a group of characters, strangers that don't really know each other, all locked in a single location, and one character says to the rest of them that one of them is not who they say they are. To start, the movie starts with a race car driver. We know he's a race car driver because we see him driving in a race car. He's actually driving one of those Indy 500 style cars, and he's going around a track, and then it cuts to a man laying in bed with a woman. And this is the opening. It's kind of juxtaposed, intercutting back and forth between the race car driver on the track and the race car driver, who is the man in bed with the woman. And it's cutting back and forth as the film opens up. And after that, we go to a scene that's in a car. And again, it's the race car driver and the woman that we saw him in bed with. And they're rolling down the highway, smoking cigarettes and chatting. And as he's driving, the woman starts to change the radio. And we get snippets of a news report that we don't get the full story because the woman changes the station and then ultimately decides enough of the radio and puts in an 8-track tape, which this little bit of information will come back to later in the story. Now, they continue their drive, and the woman sort of out of nowhere just makes the comment to the race car driver that maybe I'll have a baby. And he asks whose? And she says, my husband or you, one or the other. And he says, not me, thanks. And then she quickly says, well, I'm just kidding. So right there in that instance, it's revealed to us that the woman is married and she's in a extramarital affair with the race car driver. Which, again, this is how this movie sort of initially gives us, all of this exposition about who these people are. And it's really smart about the way it unfolds. But yeah, the two of them, they're on some late night creep, on some, they're not living right. I'm talking about they're on some savage shit. But anyways, then the woman makes the comment that her and her husband used to have fun all the time, but now he's different. And then up ahead, we see that there is a police checkpoint, and the race car driver drives to the checkpoint and stops, and his vehicle is approached on both sides by 2 cops. And they're looking in the car, and obviously the race car driver hands the cop on his side his license, and then he checks his license. He asks him where he's coming from. The race car driver tells him. Then he asks, who is his passenger? And he says, she is my wife. And the officer tells him he's sorry for the trouble, and he lets them go. And now as they're driving away, the mistress smiles and turns to him and said, you said that I was your wife. And the race car driver says, it's just a white lie. They won't suspect anything if they're married. And as they continue their drive, the woman spots a billboard for a roadside diner off the exit, and she says she's thirsty and why don't they stop by. And then the race car driver asks her if it's okay. Well, what about your husband's phone call? And she says, we can get back by 1 a.m., so, it should be okay. So he checks his watch, and then he asks her what her husband is like. And she's like, what do you mean? And he's like, he's like calling you late while he's on a business trip. Which establishes how they're able to get away with this affair right now, this evening. And she just tells him that it's a habit of his. And then he says, well, just maybe he's worried about you. And she says, no, he's just not that type. So they pull in to the diner. And as they are pulling in to park, we notice that there's a red car covered in graffiti. Like there's stuff written all over the car, and it's clearly, even though you can't read Japanese, it does say love on it, and there's a heart and a symbol, but it's pretty clear that this is a car of a newly married couple. And as the mistress and the race car driver are getting out of the car, the woman walks up to the car. She smiles and says, hey, take a look at this. And the race car driver looks the car over, and he basically says, yo, how silly. This is like nothing to brag about. Which gives us a little bit of more information about how the race car driver feels about marriage in general. So the race car driver and the mistress head into the diner. And inside the diner, we get introduced to a cast of characters. Now, some of the first people we see are a man sitting at the bar eating peanuts, which we find out is a doctor. And obviously there is the man behind the counter who is the diner owner. And we know he's the owner because someone makes the comment about how busy it's getting. And he says, yeah, I sent all of my other employees home. And now this is what happens anytime I let anybody leave early. It's just like my rotten luck. We also see over by the table a married couple who the diner owner's he's getting coffee for them. We know it's the married couple because besides the race car driver and his mistress, they're the only other couple inside. Now, at the same time, there are two young, maybe high school age girls in the diner as well. And they say they're from a university in Kyoto. So if they're in a university, maybe they're college aged, but they're very young, obviously very young. And they go to the counter and they're like literally get water and they're like dancing, and they approach the doctor and try to get him to dance, and the doctor like blows them off, So they walk away off to bother someone else, which is kind of what they do. We kind of are introduced to some other characters through the young girls approaching them, right? But yeah, the girls like go off and like are playing with a pinball machine. And then we get a moment briefly with the newlyweds, and they're at a table by themselves, like I said, drinking coffee, and they're talking about, finances and, their budget, newly married couple shit. And off in the corner, there is a man in a trench coat by himself, and he's building like a fucking Jenga tower out of matches. And this guy is like focused on nothing else. So much so that when the girls come over from the pinball machine and try and talk to him, he doesn't even acknowledge their existence. He just continues to build his Jenga tower. So the girls, they go over to a man sitting in a booth by himself, and the man looks under the weather, to say the least. And we find out that this guy is a taxi driver. And the girls sit down next to him in his booth, and they ask him, "Hey, you're a taxi driver. We ran out of money, and we need to get home. So can you take us? I mean, we know your cab is empty." But the taxi driver tells them, like, "I'm not interested, and like, I don't feel well, so like, please leave me alone." And like, judging by the way this guy looks, it's clear that Duke is sick. So we go back to the race car driver and his mistress, who are sitting at the bar, and she orders another drink. And we do notice that she's kind of getting her drink on heavy a little bit. And the race car driver asks where the toilet is. And the owner of the diner points to where the bathroom is, and she makes a comment that he's crass, and he just kind of like gives her a look and blows her off, like, whatever. And he goes into the bathroom. Now, as he's in the bathroom, we see his mistress. She's smoking her cigarette. You know, she takes a long drag, and she exhales smoke, and she's just kind of like looking off, deep in thought. And we do notice that the doctor is kind of eyeing her. And at the same time, in the bathroom, we see a small window with bars on it. Now, it's a very tiny window, and the race car driver is standing in the bathroom, taking a piss and smoking a cigarette, because, again, everybody back in the 60s smoked cigarettes in movies, and, this was the era when they did it. Shit looks cool, especially Japanese movies. But he's like, yeah, so he's using the bathroom, blowing smoke through the open window, which the reason I'm telling you that is because that window will come back into the story a little bit later. But anyhow, so back out in the diner, the bar owner or the diner owner is talking with the doctor, and this is where it's revealed that the doctor is in fact a doctor, because the doctor asked the diner owner about his shoulder, and he says that he needs him to take a look at it. And the doctor says, well, come and see me anytime. Just, you don't want to wait too long. The diner owner says, you're right. I'll come by and see you tomorrow. Okay, then the diner owner looks up and says, welcome. And we see a man enter the diner in a jean jacket, with his hand noticeably tucked in his jacket, by his chest. And the man immediately looks at the race car driver, who's just stepped out of the bathroom and is like washing his hands in a little sink outside the bathroom door. And the man in the jean jacket walks right up to the race car driver and gets like close, like it's like, and the race car driver's like sizing him up, and he's like, yo, what do you want? And the man in the jean jacket asks him, are you on your own? And then the race car driver's like, no. And then he just moves him out of the way and sits back down at the bar next to the mistress. And the race car driver looks back at the man in the jean jacket, and he kind of like smirks, because, he's sitting down next to his woman. And he's, I got me a baddie. But the race car driver goes back to talking to the mistress, and the man in the jean jacket watches them, and he actually takes a seat at the bar next to them, but like off at the end, and he's just looking at them as they talk, and it's very strange. And he's very interested in the race car driver and his interaction with the mistress for some reason, which will become apparent why soon. As the man with the jean jacket is watching, the race car driver says to the mistress, "You're drinking a lot." And she tells him that it's better than going home and drinking by herself. Then the two young girls come right over and come next to the man in the jean jacket, and they say hello, and he literally looks away. Everyone is literally not trying to pay these girls any attention. So they kind of leave again in a huff. And as they're walking away, the doctor notices them and says, "Hey, I can take you guys to Kyoto." And they say, "Really?" And they smile. And he says, "Yeah, there's nothing better than having a ride with two young women." But then the diner owner comes over and says, "Don't do it." And he tells the doctor that, "You've drank quite a bit tonight." And then the young girls say, "Drunk driving would be thrilling." This is the 60s, the late 60s, and the diner owner actually says, "Well, yeah, the laws have changed now, and you'll end up in jail," which kind of puts the kibosh on that whole idea. And the doctor kind of looks disappointed, and the girls do as well, and they run off again to go bother someone else in a second. Now, the newlywed couple gets up from their table. The wife goes to the bathroom, and the husband goes to the bar to pay. And we see the man in the jean jacket, like, looking him over, the husband, and he's taking a drink. And this is a very important, critical moment, because he's literally sizing up the whole entire diner. And we see him take one sip, put his drink down, and get up off the stool to head out of the diner. Now he's going to leave. But as soon as he gets up, the door opens and a cop steps inside. And my man in the jean jacket immediately turns around because he sees 12. And, with his hand still in his jacket. By the way, there's nothing more conspicuous than you walking around with your hand tucked under your jacket the whole time you've been in an establishment. But anyways, the cop, he comes in, and he says to everyone that, he's sorry to interrupt, but there's evidence that a criminal has been in the vicinity, and he's just here to investigate. And the mistress looks to the race car driver and says, "I wonder what's going on today." Now the cop is looking around the diner, and the man in the jean jacket is back on the stool at the end of the bar, but he's got his back to the cop, and he's literally turned his body so that he's looking at the wall, making himself very conspicuous. So the cop notices, and he walks over to him, and once he gets up to him, he says, "Excuse me," and the man in the jean jacket jumps off the stool, and his hand darts out of his jacket, and you guessed it, he has a gun, and he shoots the cop. Now the whole entire diner is shocked, and the man in the jean jacket hurries over to the door and locks it. And as he's locking the door, the newlywed wife comes out of the bathroom, sees what's going on, sees the man with the gun and the cop on the floor, and she screams. And then the man in the jean jacket looks at her, points the gun, and tells her to shut up. But at the same time, there's banging from the outside on the door. It's the cop's partner, and he's saying, "Yo, what's wrong? Open up." Now, the man in the jean jacket is freaking the fuck out, and he's screaming at the door, "I killed your partner, and if you make any more noise, I'll kill all of the customers." So the cop on the other side of the door goes quiet. And now we can see in the man in the jean jacket's face that he's like clearly in over his fucking head, and he's just trying to figure out how the fuck he can control the situation that he's in. So the gunman screams through the door at the cop that if he sees him trying to enter, that he'll kill everyone. And then he says, honk your horn if you understand what I'm saying. And then a tense moment passes, and we hear the honking of the cop car from outside, followed by the car starting up and driving away. So the cops left, presumably to go get backup, obviously. Now that the cop's out of the way for the moment, the gunman turns his attention back to the customers, and he looks to the man behind the counter, the diner owner, and he tells him, lock the back door. So the diner owner goes and locks the back door. Now the gunman is on edge, and he's clearly nervous, and everyone in the diner notices that the cop that the gunman shot is still alive because he's moaning on the floor. And the gunman walks over to the cop and stares down at him. And as he's staring down at him, you can see in his face that this guy, he's not some experienced, cold-hearted killer. He's clearly trying to get a handle on himself. And the race car driver, he's watching him closely. Now, the gunman is staring down at the dying cop, and he says to no one in particular out loud, a doctor. He needs a doctor. And the actual doctor, we see him sort of turn away. But the young girls, they say, he's a doctor, pointing to the doctor. And then the gunman looks at him and asks, can you do anything to save him? And the doctor says there's nothing he can do. So the gunman just looks down and watches as the cop twitches until finally he stops moving altogether, and he's completely motionless, and he dies. And at that point, the mistress screams out, he's dead. And the newlywed wife starts screaming and crying. And this upsets the gunman, and he tells her, to shut up. And her husband sort of like gets her under control. Then the gunman turns his attention to the taxi driver, because the taxi driver is off sitting down, and he's kind of uncomfortably moving in his seat still. Clearly he's not feeling well. And he calls to the taxi driver. He says, hey, you, come here. The taxi driver looks up, apprehensive, and he's begins to plead. And he's like, no, but the gunman's not trying to hear it. So the taxi driver, he gets up and he slowly makes his way towards the gunman, but he holds out a bag. And inside of it is all of the money he made in fares that evening. And he offers it to the gunman, saying, here, take this. This is all the money I have. Just spare me. And the gunman looks at him kind of strange, and then he says, it's not about that. But then the taxi driver isn't finished bargaining. He's like, well, I have a wife, and she's pregnant at home, and she's expecting me to be there. And, I need to be in my child's life. And the gunman makes the comment, well, is the baby yours? Which is kind of a funny comment to ask a man who's married if the baby's his. But the taxi driver responds even more strange when he says, I don't care. Like, I don't care if it's mine. I want to live. And this response sort of lets him off the hook from the gunman, because the gunman then turns his attention to the man in the trench coat. Now, remember, the man in the trench coat, the last time we saw him, he was building a Jenga tower with matches. And we see that he's still building that same tower that's even taller now with matches, as if this whole hostage situation isn't even occurring. So the gunman, he looks at him, points his gun at him, and says, "Hey, you in the corner." But the man in the trench coat is like not even responding like he did to the girls when they approached him. So he tries to get his attention again. He even yells, and the gunman is just, he's focused, he's locked in, he's building this tower. So the gunman gets pissed and he walks over, pointing the gun at him. And when he gets up next to him, he knocks over the Jenga tower full of matches. And then we really see the first kind of emotional response from the guy in the trench coat, because he looks down at the floor where all the matches are, and he just looks so disappointed and sad. And you actually feel kind of bad for him. Like, this guy really was invested in building this fucking Jenga match tower. But the gunman says to him that Yoko isn't coming. And he doesn't respond. And then he says, "You're the one, aren't you? The one that made a move on Yoko." And again, like, we don't know who Yoko is. And the man in trench coat clearly doesn't care if he does, because he's not responding. And he says to him, "Yoko is dead." He tells the man in the trench coat that he killed Yoko with this, referencing the gun he's holding. And he says, she was shocked when he pointed it at her. He says she was crying and on her knees begging when he put a bullet in her. Now, we have no idea who Yoko is. And the man in the trench coat says to the gunman that, "I know no such woman." Come to find out that Yoko is the girlfriend of the gunman. Now, the gunman doesn't believe the man in the trench coat, and he pistol whips him to the floor and tells him to stop lying. At this point, it gets revealed that the gunman has come to this diner specifically looking for a man. And the man that he's looking for was supposed to meet Yoko at this diner. But Yoko never made it to the diner because, as the gunman has confessed to, he killed her. Now, the gunman still thinks that the man in the trench coat is the guy that he's looking for. And as the man in the trench coat pulls himself off the floor, his head bloody from being pistol whipped by the gunman, he's just standing there, again, looking off into space, while the gunman is telling him that it's his fault, that he killed Yoko. You see, he's blaming everything that happened on the man in the trench coat. Now, everyone in the diner is watching as this is going on, and he tells the man in the trench coat that Yoko died fast, but he's going to die slowly. Now, the man in the trench coat is literally standing with his eyes closed at this point, not saying anything. And the gunman gets pissed off because he's not responding. So the gunman shoves his face with his pistol, and finally the man in the trench coat turns to him and says, "Do I look like I could have taken your woman?" Now, the gunman, skeptical, he's like, "Nah, it has to be you." He said, "You told Yoko to come here by 11:30. Now, at this moment, we start to get information about who the man in the trench coat actually is for the first time, because he tells the gunman that he doesn't know a woman named Yoko, and that he's a loser just like him, and that they've both made mistakes. Now, this response confuses the gunman, and he's like, "Nah, man, it has to be you, because, like, who else could it be?" But the man in the trench coat is like, "How the hell should I know?" That's when the race car driver chimes in and says, "The man that you're looking for might not be here yet." And the gunman turns to him and says, "What did you say?" And the race car driver says to him that you got here when the television show that's playing on the TV in the diner started, and that show starts at 11:15. And basically, you might have come early. Now, the gunman's thinking this over, and he's not trying to hear it. He's like, no, this it's not possible. But you can tell that in his head, he's thinking, shit, is that, what time did I get here? Then the gunman glances at the doctor, and the doctor immediately is like, yo, I'm not the man you looking for. Like, women don't even like me like that. And then the owner of the diner says, yo, I've got 2 grown daughters. Like, I'm not the guy either. So the gunman is standing there, and he just begins to start laughing. And it's like a psychotic laugh. And like everyone is just kind of watching him as he's like psychotically standing there holding the gun, laughing, just laughing at the whole entire situation, because he kind of realizes how absurd he is. Plus, he's a little fucking crazy. Now, at that same time, his laughter is interrupted when the cops from outside come on a bullhorn and tell the gunman to drop his weapon and come out because they have the diner surrounded. The gunman doesn't respond. Instead, he turns around, walks to the middle of the diner and bends down and picks up some money that fell from the taxi man's fare bag. And he puts some money in the jukebox and turns on a song. And the song is like a very, well, for one, it's a Japanese song, but it's a very romantic style ballad. And clearly this is a sentimental song, because as he listens to it, the gunman is like leaning against the wall and on the jukebox, and he's like staring off. And it's just pretty obvious that he's thinking about Yoko. And then the gunman turns to the diner owner and he tells him to pour everyone drinks. Then he calls the 2 young girls over, and as they walk up to him, one of the girls tells him that they'll do whatever he wants and that they'll replace his dead girlfriend. And this pisses off the gunman, and he slaps the girl to the floor. And then her friend helps her back up, and she's crying, and the gunman makes both the girls start handing everyone drinks that the diner owner is pouring. So he's pretty much making sure that everyone is participating in his little drink party. And he walks up to the newlyweds and he sees that the wife isn't drinking, and he pours her a glass, but the husband says that she can't drink. But the gunman is like, the fuck she can't. And he, at gunpoint, makes the wife drink a glass and then pours her another. And then when she gets that glass nearly done, he fills her glass back up again. And he starts to fill up both the husband and the wife's glass every time they drink their glass nearly empty. Now, fortunately, this gets interrupted when the taxi driver falls to the floor of the diner in pain. And at first, the gunman thinks that the taxi driver is faking it, but it becomes pretty clear to not only the gunman but everyone in the diner that this isn't an attempt by the taxi driver to fake like he's hurt so that he can escape. So the gunman looks to the doctor and tells him to check on the taxi driver. So the doctor gets up begrudgingly and he checks on the taxi driver, and he says, yeah, man, he needs to be in a hospital. There's really nothing we can do for him here. Now the man is still on the ground. Still on the floor. And we see the mistress, and she's just kind of losing it, right? And it's getting kind of like real tense, and you can hear like people laughing in the background from the TV. So the gunman makes the the diner owner turned the television off, and then all goes quiet. And it's like an eerie kind of like loaded silence. And then the phone starts ringing. And the diner owner tries to answer the phone, but again, the gunman's like, yo, don't touch the fucking phone. So he lets the phone ring and ring and ring until finally it stops ringing. And the whole restaurant is silent once again. And he's just standing there holding the gun. He actually has the gun pointed on the race car driver. So after a beat of like, pretty thick tension, we see that the race car driver stands up from his stool and then walks over to the phone. And then, the gunman's like, hey, what are you doing? And the race car driver's like, I'm going to take him outside. He's like, what? And everybody's looking at him at this point, especially the mistress. She's like, yo, I'm going to call 911 and have them remove the barricades, and that should make you happy. So immediately, the gunman grabs the mistress from her stool and puts a gun to her head. Now, the mistress is staring at the race car driver wide-eyed, and she's like, stop. I beg you. And she's like watching him in sheer terror. And the race car driver just nonchalantly continues what he's doing. He literally picks the phone up, dials 911. He says, hello, can you hear me? Hello? And obviously there's an issue with the phone, so he has, again, very calmly, has the diner owner fix the phone. Then again, he calls 911. And he gets on the phone and he says, send an ambulance, and like basically don't try and set a trap, because if you try and set a trap, the man inside, he will kill everyone. So just make sure you keep your end of the promise, and none of us will end up victims. And just send a signal over the speaker to let us know it's okay to bring him out. Then he hangs up the phone. Now, interestingly, the gunman tells the race car driver, thanks a lot for that. And he releases the mistress. And the mistress falls back down onto her stool and starts to sob. And then the race car driver comes over to her to console her. But she looks at him angry and tells him that, you could have gotten me killed. And the gunman is walking around trying to decide who it is he should have take the taxi driver out of the diner. And the doctor attempts to volunteer, but he tells the doctor, you're not going anywhere, because if anyone else gets hurt, I'm going to need you here. So the gunman decides that it'll be the race car driver and the newlywed husband that will take the taxi driver out of the diner, because he has an insurance policy, because they'll be leaving behind both of their women. So he knows basically if they don't come back, then he will shoot both their wives. Well, one of their wives, and the other that he thinks is the race car driver's wife. And I promise everything is getting to the end here, so just stay with me. Now, the race car driver goes over to help the husband carry out the taxi driver. And the mistress looks to the gunman and says, please don't let him go. And the gunman looks at her curious, like, yo, what's going on between you two? Because he's completely unaware that they're actually not married and that she's married to another man. But it's not stopping anything from happening. So the two men grab the taxi driver, and the gunman tells the doctor to open the door. So the doctor goes over and opens the door, and the two men carry the man out. And as they get outside, the gunman runs up and shuts the door behind them. And he goes over to the mistress and puts the gun to the back of her head and waits. And in honestly one of the more tense moments in the movie, we see the customers that are inside the diner with the gunman just all waiting silently for the men to return. And after a few seconds, maybe 30 seconds go by this whole time, but it feels longer. Maybe, it could be 10 seconds that feels like 30 seconds, or 30 seconds that feels like a minute. But it's not a long amount of time, but the filmmakers really do a good job of, like, milking the tension in this moment. But finally, we hear a knock at the door, and the door gets opened by the doctor, and in walks the husband by himself. And we're like, oh shit, did my man not stay? Did he actually run away? But no. A second later, we see the race car driver walk in right behind him. So the gunman runs over with the mistress in his arm and slams the door and locks it. Then he shoves her to the floor, and the race car driver goes over to her and helps her up and takes her over to the bar, where he has the diner owner pour them both some brandy. Now, the gunman, he's really losing it, and we've been watching him kind of lose it over the course of this entire movie. And at this moment, he decides that he wants to turn on some more music on the jukebox and make everyone dance. And he literally says, yo, dance or I'm going to shoot you. He's like, everyone has to dance. If you don't dance, I'm going to shoot you. So he make you dance like you're having fun. And everyone's dancing, the girls are dancing, the husband and the newlyweds are dancing, slow dancing. And then, of course, the race car driver and his mistress are dancing. And at a certain point, there's another exchange. The race car driver and his mistress are having conversations. She's just sort of kind of shocked, like, you came back, and his response is sort of, like, yeah, I came back. You know what I mean? Like, and she's genuinely sort of like, I'm not saying, not necessarily, it seems as if she's almost touched by it. You know what I mean? Like, touched that he would, but, like, if not touched, just more sort of like amazed, because you could really sense that, like, she's just like, maybe this guy cares about me a little bit more than he lets on. Maybe he cares about, maybe I care about him, which we've been getting the sense since the very opening, car ride to the diner. But at a little bit after, this sort of like dance scene plays itself out. The gunman grabs the mistress and he says, "You're coming with me into the bathroom." Now, the race car driver sort of kind of freezes, and he's like, "What?" Like, everyone is sort of, this alarms everyone in the diner, and he's basically like, "Listen, I'm going in here with her, and if anyone tries to run, if anyone does anything, I'll kill her. Like, don't try anything. If I hear anything, I'll kill her," right? So we're not quite sure what he's going in the bathroom for. See, and it's not really made clear, like, and I think that's intentional. Now, you could be like, maybe he needs to go to the bathroom. And because he needs to go to the bathroom, he can't just go in the bathroom when he's got all these people on hostage and not take anybody, not take any sort of insurance policy that no one tries anything, right? Like, so he's basically like, yo, no one can leave. If you, like, and he basically puts it on the race car driver. He's like, listen, like, I'm taking her in here with me, right? And if anyone leaves, if you let anyone leave, I'm going to kill her and I'm going to shoot everyone else. Like, so, boom. Or if I hear anything, I'm going to shoot her and then I'm going to start shooting everybody. So it's like, but it's on you. Now, we're not sure, again, if he just needs to go to the bathroom, and again, this is intentional by the filmmaker, I'm pretty sure. If he's got to go to the bathroom, or is he going to take her inside there and, I don't know, assault her, rape her? We don't know. Like, that's part of the tension of the scene. So he takes her into the bathroom and closes the door. Now, as he does that, we do see the doctor immediately start inching towards the door. And the race car driver says, stop. You're not going nowhere. Don't even think about it, right? Boom. The doctor inches, basically slinks back over to his stool, sits the fuck down. But the two young girls run for the door. And also we see the newlywed couple head for the door. And basically the girls are like, we don't know her. We don't know her. She's a stranger. So they're like trying to get out. So immediately the race car driver is like over there trying to stop them. Like, hey, stop. What are you but right when that occurs, right when they're trying to get out of the door, we hear a gunshot. Boom. Everyone stops, freezes cold. Now the girls back away from the door, and the newlywed couple, who are just about to try and get out, they stay right there at the front door, right? And out comes, from the bathroom, out comes the gunman with the mistress. And apparently a cop had peered into the bathroom at him, and he shot the cop. So now that he's shot, that's 2 cops he's killed. And at this point, he's freaking the fuck out. You know what I'm saying? He's freaking the fuck out. He's like, I'm getting the death penalty. I'm getting the death penalty now, so I don't got nothing to lose. I'm not scared of anything now. Fuck it. So again, now he's just becoming more and more unhinged. So at this point, he's like really on one. He's really unhinged. So, and he notices the newlywed couple by the front door, and he's like, oh, he comes up to them and approaches them and says, oh, you were trying to escape? And they were like, no. And he's like, and I hate liars. So what he begins to do is to start to fuck with the newlywed couple. And he starts to talk to the husband about, how much he loved his woman and his girlfriend, right? But like ultimately he shot and killed his girlfriend because his girlfriend was, at this point he's turned into a misogynist, basically, where like he's so jilted by his ex-girlfriend, the one he had to kill because she was going to the diner to meet up with another man, right? He's so like jilted by this, he's a jilted lover, that he's like, you see his hatred for women like really come out, like, and he's like trying to convince the newlywed husband that his wife is no different from any other woman, or like, you don't love your wife as much as I loved my ex, because I loved her that much that I killed her. Some weird sort of twisted, a very twisted sort of psychology. Like and he's really like, they're having it out a little bit, like where the husband's standing up for his wife and he's saying, I love my wife just as much as you love her, et cetera, et cetera. So the driver decides to show the husband that his wife is no different from any women, So what he does is he grabs his wife, pulls her away from the husband, right? He throws her down on one of the, it's like one of the booth seats that they have inside the diner. And he looks and he looks at the doctor and he says, I'm going to show, and then he looks back to the newlywed husband. And here's where it gets a little fucking sadistic and like twisted, is he says, I'm going to show you because I'm going to have him have sex with your wife right here, just to show you that she's no different from any of these other women, that they're all like this, that you can't trust any of them, right? And he says to the doctor, go. And he tells the woman, like, yo, I will shoot you and him, like, if this doesn't happen. So the doctor, trying to save his own cowardly ass, jumps on her and starts to, like, try, and he's kissing on her. You could see there's some hesitance there, but he's also like trying to save his own ass. And she's fighting back and screaming. She's screaming and fighting back. No, don't stop, screaming to her husband. Now the husband he's like, at this point, he's in agony, and you could see it. He's crying. But the gunman he grabs him and he's trying to make him watch. And he's like, stop, no, no. And he's like, you could see like the sense of him wanting to fight, You know what I mean? But he doesn't fight. And then he's like fighting. And he's trying to make him look and he won't look, right? And meanwhile, everyone in the diner watches on just sort of horrified at what the fuck is happening. I mean, why wouldn't you be horrified by something like that, right? So as this whole thing is, going down, the woman is struggling and fighting and struggling and fighting. At a certain point, the husband fucking loses it. And the husband manages to get free. I think he's at one point he's like the gunman is like, look, I told you, look, I'm telling you, she's no different. Look, and he like lets him go, and he's like sort of on his knees, and he's like trying to look away again. And then at some point, he just fucking loses it, and he runs up and grabs the fucking doctor, throws him to the fucking floor off of his wife, and proceeds to like kick and punch and beat him. You know what I mean? And then once he stops, you know what I'm saying? Then the gunman just sort of, he's watching it at this point. He's just watching what's going down. He's watching the man do it. But then when the man stops and he goes to check on his wife, the gunman goes over to the doctor and kicks him, starts kicking him and shit. And then he tells him basically, I should shoot you right now because any man who touches the woman of another man isn't worthy of living. Again, because that's the whole reason and purpose why he came to the diner, was because he wanted to find the guy who was in his eyes, stealing the woman he loved from him, right? But when he says that, we get a look from the race car driver and the mistress. They both share a look, because they both realize, obviously, they fall into that category, specifically the race car driver, because he's literally doing that with the mistress. So before that situation gets any fucking crazier, because it's already crazy, right? It's already like one of those things where it's like, yo, this guy is a fucking lunatic. I don't know if we're gonna survive any of this, right? Before it gets any fucking crazier, the race car driver sees his chance, and he rushes the gunman, and they fight and struggle for the gun. Now, something I forgot to mention is that there's two guns, because before the gunman went into the bathroom with the mistress, the gunman took the cop's gun from his holster, because as he was backing into the bathroom looking at the race car driver, he saw the race car driver's eyes glance down to the dead cop and the dead cop's gun, which prompted the gunman to take the gun with him and put it in his waist. So as they're fighting, there's two guns, but he's struggling with the gunman to control or to take his gun from him. And the second gun falls to the floor, and it's picked up by the mistress. And the mistress trains the gun on the gunman, and the two men break apart, and the gunman turns and looks at the mistress, who's got the gun drawn on him, and he walks up to her just unafraid, because he just knows she's not going to pull the trigger. And he's right, because he gets close and takes the gun away from her. Now at this point, she runs over to help up the race car driver, and he gets to his feet, and the gunman is now super pissed off, and he walks up to the race car driver, and he tells him, now I'm going to kill you. And he trains his gun on him, and before he can pull the trigger, the mistress jumps in front of him, and she says, I'm not afraid, you can shoot me. But then the race car driver gets in front of her and says, shoot me. And then the woman, she says, if you shoot him, I'll kill you. And seeing this solidarity between these two, it really angers and enrages the gunman because he's reminded of, you know, Yoko and, the woman that he felt betrayed by, the woman he loved. And he's seeing their love for each other and not even realizing that this couple isn't actually married. So he grabs the race car driver and puts both guns to the back of him. And then he looks at the mistress and he tells her to strip naked or he's going to kill the race car driver. And actually, this is where it gets kind of sadistic because he's just watching her and everyone is just silently watching. And it's very like voyeuristic almost and like shameful because he's like shaming this woman in front of everybody, including the man that she cares about. And that at this point we understand she loves and he loves her. And the race car driver is actually looking off while the gunman is staring right at the mistress as she's taking her clothes off and literally gets down to her bra and takes her bra off. And she's standing there with her hands covering her breast. And she gives the race car driver a look, which causes the gunman to club him over the back of the head. And the race car driver falls to his knees and then gets back up. And the gunman shoves his gun in his chest. But then he moves forward and he hears someone say, "Stop this already." And everybody looks over and they see the man in the trench coat holding a revolver, a .38. And he fires, shooting the gunman in the chest. And he falls to the floor. And everyone's like shocked. And the man in the trench coat gets up from the stool, walks over to where the gunman lays, stands right over him, puts the gun right against his shirt as he looks at him in the eye, and fires until his whole revolver is empty. So everyone in the diner is just standing there silent as the man in the trench coat is standing over the body of the gunman. And the race car driver goes over to where the mistress is and he takes off his blazer and covers her up. And as he does that, the door is shot open by the police and they come in. And immediately they see the man in the trench coat and they put him in handcuffs. And everyone in the diner is telling the police, no, it's not him. He's not the guy. But the police inform them that actually this is who they're looking for. They were looking for a man with a .38 revolver that was involved in other crimes, which we heard in the beginning on the radio before the mistress changed the station. So the whole time we were under the assumption that the criminal on the run was in fact the gunman, but it was actually the man in the trench coat. And the whole reason that the gunman was there was to kill the man who his girlfriend Yoko was there to meet. And it had absolutely nothing to do with him being on the run, which, when you think about it, when he shot the cop, you wonder now, like, well, why did he do that? Was it because he had a gun on him? Because obviously he wasn't a fugitive, but maybe he was thinking that he killed Yoko and the cops were looking for him. But he had no idea that there was a criminal at large, a bigger fish, that the police were actually looking for, and it was the man in the trench coat the whole time who was in the corner building a Jenga tower with matchsticks. So now, after the hostage situation is over, we see the outside of the diner. It's swarming with news people and police officers, and we watch as the characters exit, now free, now no longer hostages, from the diner, and we watch them come out, and we see the married couple come out, and then they go over to their car, painted with all the well wishes and just married stuff all over the car, and they get in, and then they're followed by the race car driver and the mistress, who come out. They walk through the crowd of people outside, and they get in his car. And as they get in the car, the race car driver takes a cigarette out and lights it, and the mistress is just sitting there, like just kind of staring off and probably trying to process everything that just happened this night. And while that's going on, we see a nice car, I think it's a Mustang, pulls up, and out gets a well-dressed tall man with dark hair. And he walks up to a cop who's standing guard, and he says, "Hey, what are you doing?" And he says, I have to meet somebody in there. What's going on? Did something happen? And the cop explains to him, like, yeah, there was an incident. And he's like, well, who's the person that was waiting for you? Is it a man? It's a woman? And he said, it's a woman. And he says to the cop that there was a roadblock along the way, and no one picked up the phone at the restaurant, which explains why he didn't show up on time. And the cop tells him that all the customers that were in there had already left, and there weren't any unaccompanied women customers. So this is who Yoko was going to meet at 11:30, who the gunman had came to shoot, was this guy. By the very end of the movie, everything is kind of tied up in a neat little bow. And that's just something that like I really appreciate about this movie, because it's one of those movies too where like when you rewatch it, there'll be little things that you pick up. Like it's a fairly straightforward story, and it's not like a lot of things are hidden, but upon like recapping this movie, I'm remembering aspects and elements now that I'm piecing back together, which just speaks to like the quality of the writing and just how this film was constructed overall. And as the guy gets back into his car and drives away, we see the diner owner watching him, and he makes the comment that, yo, some guys are so lucky. And then he turns off the light outside of the diner. And then as the guy who came to meet Yoko drives forward in his car, at the same time, in reverse, crossing paths, we see the race car driver and the mistress in his car. And the shot freezes on them as he's reversing, as they're literally crossing paths. And it's like a perfect sort of bit of like visual symbolism to end the film.
We belong to a mutual admiration society. My baby and me. We belong to a mutual